So we take these four composers. Three of them were writing in the First World War, during the First World War. Claude Debussy, Leos Janáček, and Ottorino Respighi. And all of them, in a way, protesting through their music about the events that were happening. And one composer, looking at the centenary from our own times, Kenneth Hesketh, and he wrote a short piece that reflects on these 100 years.
I think we have an interesting juxtaposition between these three completely different views of not just of the genre of the sonata, but of course also stylistically. I mean, we look at Debussy, who of course represents the French school, and not just the French musical school, but also the kind of the French way of thinking, the French aesthetic, if you like.
He was very ill at the time, also very poor, and very disheartened and depressed and anxious about the war. And he wrote in a letter, he wrote, "When will this hate end?" He was so devastated by the hatred all around him. And he signed this sonata, he signed it off Claude Debussy, musicien français. So it was his quietly defiant way of protesting against the German bombardment all around him. And he also wrote in a letter that this sonata, in all of its freshness and purity and almost innocence, was a secret dedication to the French youth of today, so, or of that generation. So he was kind of quietly protesting by dedicating music of great beauty and simplicity and purity. That was his way of protesting against the violence that was all around him. Janáček did something else.
With Janáček, it's first of all, it's a different stage of the war. So when Janáček wrote his sonata, it was 1914. I think he's trying to make the violin very often sound like a human voice, like a sort of this very, very intimate and very kind of sensitive voice. The voice of tragedy, the voice of sometimes the voice of despair, but also the voice of great lyricism and beauty and fragility, I would say. Janáček has always been very pro-Russian, so he was in a way like looking forward to Russian forces entering his hometown of Brno, where he was living at the time, because he was kind of looking forward to the liberation from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He thought
this war was the chance to free his native land from Austro-Hungarian grip. So this ballada, the second movement that we're talking about, the slow movement of the sonata, is in a way a kind of folk depiction of his homeland that he wants to see freed and liberated. But the other movements, he's really, I think, depicting extreme barbarism and violence and brutality of the war. And he said that when he was writing the sonata, that he could almost hear the sound of steel clashing in his head. So the first movement is extremely violent. It's a very unsettling experience for the listener. And the finale is also has these strange markings like fortissimo, feroce, but con sordino, with the mute. So you have this kind of outbursts, this kind of anguished outbursts that are at the same time stifled, as if an oppressor's hand is, covering them, and they get softer and softer and softer at the end. So they end not fortissimo, not feroce, just desolate and resigned and empty, hopeless. So it's a quite unsettling sonata. It's very different from Debussy, who wanted to protest against the violence by writing something of incredible beauty and purity.
what Respighi was doing with his sonata, in a way, he was trying to challenge the sort of German hegemony of the sonata form, which belonged to Germany. And I mean, in France, it started a bit earlier. I mean, we have the examples of Fauré and Franck already doing those sonatas, but in Italy, much later. So it took another 20, 30 years.
And Respighi was, in a way, trying to show that Italian composers couldn't only write opera, that they could write, symphonic music and instrumental music. He was a pioneer in this regard.
Yeah, so this dialectic idea of a sonata form, he applied it with great confidence in this piece, and it definitely shows that the chamber music can be just as coherent and has just as much integrity as the great German.
Yeah, and we looked at the finale, the Passacaglia, which seems to a little bit take its inspiration from Brahms, the finale of Brahms' Fourth Symphony, also a Passacaglia. Verdi and Puccini, they're composers for voice, composers for opera. Respighi was, and then of course in the orchestral works, in the Roman trilogy, he was a great orchestrator. We thought about quite a few different composers. We really wanted to commission a new piece and make a premiere and tie it all up, because I think it's just as important that we look back and reflect on this centenary from our times, to try to learn, to see what we've learned, to see what of course we've not learned, and to respond in a way to the music also, with some music from our time. So yeah, Ken's piece is very meditative in a quite anxious, quite
I think it's a very concentrated emotion at times, and yet it's prolonged. So you kind of experience that emotion over quite a bit of time. So in a way, it becomes sort of like you look at that emotion via a magnifying glass sort of feeling.
That's true. And I think Ken, at the moment in his writing, is exploring these themes of death, of the
mortality.
Memento mori, the awareness of that you're going to die. And it so happened that our theme that we were looking at was so he's taken a kind of, in a way, I think a sort of false meditation on the dying man, so it's not a man who's accepting what's happening, it's a man, he subtitles this work, A Lie to the Dying. As we were walking yesterday in the trenches, which are now, of course, yesterday so peaceful and beautiful, but were one day full of jittering half corpses, or mutilated bodies, or, sadly, that's the reality of what those places were. So
yeah, absolutely. That was quite a unique experience. I mean, we saw this beautiful. Well, in a way, it's beautiful in its degradation. I mean, the fort from 1912, and I mean, you can almost like and there is this great contrast between the peaceful surroundings and the sort of the intensity inside. You can almost like feel the concentration of that tragedy in there. But I think the other thing which Ken does beautifully in the piece is looking at the fragility and the sort of the elusive quality of human life, essentially. I mean, this markings that he gives to the performers to play as if it's writing on sand, or writing on water.
Writing on water, writing on sand.
So basically, like you make a splash and then it disappears into the waves, and it's also, one can think about the renewal of a human life, and the continuous aspect of it, as well as the finality.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to put into words the brutality and the pain and the suffering and even the fact that any of this stuff happened at all. It's very hard to talk about it or to find the right words. And I think, in a way, the quotation that sticks out in my mind when we think about this project that we've made together to explore this centenary of the First World War is from Victor Hugo, who said that music expresses that which cannot be put into words and yet cannot remain silent. And I think that's our duty in a way as musicians. That's what we can do. That's what we can give. you.